So about our wonderful speaker, Dr. Linda Hoops. Dr. Linda Hoops helps individuals, teams, and organizations learn to thrive in turbulence. She's president and founder of Resilience Alliance, and she brings over 25 years of experience in psychology and organizational change to her work as a consultant, trainer, and speaker. And she is the author of Prosilience, Building Your Resilience for a Turbulent World. Linda received her undergraduate degree from Davidson College, and she received her PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Tennessee, and has served on the faculties of several institutions, including Rutgers, Georgia Tech, and Colby College. And if you'll take a moment with me to welcome our speaker, Dr. Linda Hoops.
Hi, everybody. We've got everybody muted, but you know, one of the things that I've learned is that the content of what we do is only a little part of what we do together. The connection is so tremendously important, especially when we're far apart from each other. So I'm gonna just unmute. I wanna hear your voices. Just say hi. Just say hello to each other.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Everyone.
Hello.
Smiling faces.
Wonderful. I'm sitting here in Atlanta. My office is in downtown Decatur, for those of you who know the Atlanta area. And I'm looking out my window and it's raining here, but Barbara tells me that it's sunny in Charlotte. So that's a good thing. So I'm delighted to be here, and Barbara has been keeping me up on the latest in sort of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system about all the plans for what's going to happen or not happen. Atlanta has its own perilous challenges to deal with around the school systems, but just watching how everybody is working their way through the current situation is, of course, very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. I have some PowerPoint slides. We're going to talk about teaching with resilience. And Barbara already talked about me. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk about sort of what resilience is from my perspective and why it's important. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of resilience in the classroom. But then we're going to focus on you. We're going to focus on 4 building blocks of resilience, and most, if not all of you, had a chance to complete the personal resilience profile. Those should have been emailed to you this morning. So, resilience, what and why? I start with the assumption that we are all working toward flourishing. And when I think about flourishing from the perspective of what Dr. Martin Seligman and other people talk about, I see it as having 2 dimensions. One is feeling good, sort of subjectively, you know, a sense of well-being, feeling happy, and all of that. The other dimension is being effective and productive at what we do, bringing our best selves into the world and doing what we're here to do, whether it's teaching, parenting, learning, you know, as a friend of mine says, putting tops on bottoms in factories, or, you know, whatever it might be, we want to be productive. So I invite you to find your annotation thing and just scribble me, where are you today? So there's kind of 4 zones here. Struggling is I'm not feeling all that good and I'm not making much headway on being productive. Slacking is kind of the Saturday afternoon zone where you're feeling good, but you're not getting a lot done. Laboring is the zone of I'm getting work done, but I'm not feeling all that good. And then flourishing is that zone where we've got it all going on. So when I think about what it takes to flourish, a lot of that is about overcoming challenges or taking on positive challenges. So when I think of a challenge, I use the word neutrally. When we think about resilience, we often think about dealing with problems. But when I think about it, I think about really anything that's a problem or an opportunity. Sometimes we take on challenges voluntarily because they allow us to stretch and grow. Sometimes we encounter challenges that just come to us in the way of the world. But challenges in general represent a gap between where we are and where we wish or would like to be, sort of the current state and some desired future state. And what they all have in common is they take physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual energy. So I'm going to get a little theoretical with you here for just a minute as we talk about this, but then we're going to get into talking about where we are today and what challenges we're facing right at this moment. So challenges come in all shapes and sizes. There's the big, fat, scary ones. There's the little annoying ones. There's the ones that look cute and then have unexpected challenges underneath. So the thing about resilience is that it can't be just one thing. Resilience is a process because we've got to be able to deal with all different kinds of challenges. We've got to be able to deal with the kind of acute things that come on really suddenly. We have to deal with the challenges that drag on for a long time or that we live with for all of our lives. And so when I think about what resilience is, I think about a whole system of things. And so that's where we're going to spend some time today. Now, this is the version of a slide that I had before about examples of challenge for a corporate audience. You know, you might have to move, you might be making a speech, etc. And the coronavirus kind of popped up on the screen a few months ago. Well, now, July 2020, here's kind of my version of challenges. We've got the coronavirus, we've got the economy, we've got issues of racial injustice, we've got riots, we've got hurricanes, we've got education stuff, we've got economic stuff, and then we've got all the other life challenges that we have. So we've all got lots of different things going on. And so in just a minute, I'm going to invite you to talk to me about your own challenges. But what I see with challenges is that they start, and then we spend some energy, and sometimes they get resolved, and then sometimes they just take on a rhythm of their own. So some challenges are acute, some are episodic, you know, where they kind of show up every season. Sometimes there are challenges that go on for a long time. And so I want you to just think for a minute about the different challenges that you are working through in your life right now. And I'm going to show you a model that you might be able to use to think about these. So this is a model that I developed for the book that Barbara mentioned called Prosilience, and it's a challenge map that basically shows how all the different kinds of challenges we face can be represented on a landscape. And resilience is really about what it takes to deal with all of those kinds of things. So when I think about challenges, I think about them in terms of duration. How long do they last? So we can probably think of some of the challenges that we face that are just moments. You know, we're dealing with a crabby customer service representative, or if we're driving and somebody cuts us off in traffic, or, you know, somebody's cross to us or whatever. Then there are challenges that last days and weeks, which is kind of what we thought maybe the coronavirus thing was going to be originally. Hey, 2 weeks, we're going to lock this thing down, we're going to flatten that curve, we're going to get on with our lives. But then it's now stretched out to months and years, and good Lord willing, it won't last decades or a lifetime. But we do have challenges that last that long, you know, special needs kids, aging parents, illnesses that last a long time, chronic things. And so some challenges really draw on our energy for a long period of time. Then I think about where challenges come from. I think about the source of challenges. And at the bottom here, you'll see at the left, we have some challenges that we consciously choose. We have some challenges that are a side effect of decisions we make. If you've ever entered into a committed relationship, or brought a child into your household, or moved into a new place, or taken a new job, you know that you probably didn't do these things because they were going to be challenging, but they show up that way. And then there are challenges that come from just life. As I get older, I recognize that there are some challenges that come with aging. There are challenges that come with, I grew up in Florida, we had hurricanes that showed up every now and then. So there's stuff happens kinds of challenges. And then there are challenges that come from other people. So other people may do things intentionally or unintentionally that create challenges for us, whether it's by their actions or their attitudes or whatever. And then at the very far right, we have challenges that come from bad intentions. That's things like bullying, abuse, you know, things where people are setting out to do wrong, you know, the evil in the world and all of that. And so if we can think about the different challenges that we face here, the other thing that we can do is to look at them in terms of how impactful they are, how much of our energy they take. And so if you imagine, where would you put the divorce? Well, that's probably a months to years thing. It may be others' actions. It may be a choice that we made. If we think about, I have a sister who has a child with special needs. That's kind of a years-long stuff happens sort of thing. Coronavirus, who knows? But every single challenge we face falls into some of these categories. And so I use this as a starting point to think about how we are, sort of what we're dealing with right now. So what I'd like you to do right now is to open your chat window and share what is one of the biggest challenges you're currently dealing with. I'd like to hear about sort of what's going on in your world. So let's just take a minute and breathe as we think about all the different challenges each other's facing, and just take a minute and connect with your heart and breathe into, oh, the loss of a father, oh my gosh, just all kinds of things. Just breathe into this and just send out your support for this group, because we are sort of a microcosm of the world. So now what I'd like you to do is to take your annotation if you can get to it. If not, don't worry about it, just do it mentally. And find a picture that represents how you're feeling about this particular challenge. If we were face to face, I have photo decks that we use at tables to hand out and get people talking about their challenges. So take just a minute and show me how you're feeling about it. All right, let's go on from here. So here's the thing, challenges use energy. So some of the challenges that we face are physical. Hang on while I clear all this. And so physical challenges are, illness is a physical challenge. Pregnancy has physical challenges, of course, associated with it. Sitting in front of a computer screen all day has some physical challenges, not being able to get into our regular routines of exercise and eating and all of that. So any of the challenges that we're facing that call on using our body, losing sleep, whatever, those are challenges, of course, that take physical energy. If you're training for a marathon or whatever it might be, that's a physical challenge. Some of the challenges that we face are mental. So when we have to analyze things, figure things out, understand what's going on, I know a lot of us are using mental energy around this whole coronavirus thing just to understand what's the science, what's happening, what's safe to do, what information can we find that's going to help us make good decisions. So any of those problem solving kinds of things take mental energy. Then there's challenges that take emotional energy. So when we're working with our own feelings or others' feelings of sadness or anger or loss or just any of the feelings that are difficult, sometimes it's our own, and sometimes it's being with other people who are feeling emotions that are challenging to deal with. So that takes energy as well. And then finally, some challenges are spiritual in nature. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean specifically religious, but spiritual energy is the energy we use to connect with a sense of meaning and purpose and compassion and all of that. And so when we encounter challenges that test our values, that cause us to think hard about what the right thing to do is, what the ethical thing to do is. I saw an article not too long ago, I think it was in Rolling Stone, but it was talking about moral fatigue and the fact that in this age of coronavirus, we are making moral choices all the time. Is it okay to go visit my mom? What's the safe thing to do here? How do I, and a ton of moral questions about how do I operate as an upper middle class white woman in a world that, where that represents a level of privilege that I have some responsibility for working with. So there's all different kinds of questions that come up that are really spiritual in nature. And so I'm going to put a little poll up. I'm going to ask you, which of these forms of energy are you using the most these days? So take just a few minutes, and you can pick more than one, but I'm just curious to see which of your energies are being the most engaged. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. All right, so this is interesting. So not as much the physical energy. I think we're all sitting around a lot. The mental energy, a lot, emotional, some spiritual. So absolutely. And they're all related. You know, when you're feeling physically tired, your emotions are closer to the surface. When you're feeling emotionally drained, you can't think as clearly. You know, when you have moral choices to make, then it's, you know, your emotions are, it just really, it's this whole, there's not really 4 kinds of energy. It's just 4 different angles in looking at it, for sure. Absolutely. These are totally overwhelming times. So, and then when we add on top of that, that some challenges bring a level of adversity. So when challenges show up in a way that feels scary, where there's potential danger or threat or loss, one of the things that we know is that it starts to act on our body and mind. It makes it more difficult for us to access the parts of our brain that think clearly. It makes it, it really makes us respond differently to situations. And it makes challenges harder because we first have to put the energy in place to get past that sense of danger or threat or loss, and then move into addressing the issue, addressing the problem, or whatever that might be. So I would imagine that some of the things that you all shared in terms of examples are exciting, fun, optimistic kinds of challenges, but there are some that really feel scary or that feel a sense of loss. Absolutely. So we're going to do a breakout discussion. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to break it into groups of 3 or 4 people. And I'd like you to just think through, so challenges, the coronavirus isn't a challenge per se, it presents challenges. It presents challenges of wearing masks and whatever. Teaching remotely isn't a challenge per se, it brings challenges. It brings challenges of figuring out, how do I engage students? How do I work with parents? You know, how do I do this or that? So what I'd like you to do is in your breakouts is to discuss, like, break it down. Teaching remotely, teaching from a distance, how does it show up specifically in terms of challenges for you, for your students, for the parents? When we encounter more challenges than we have the energy to absorb, we start to see signs of overload. And these are some of the ways that that shows up. So we can, when we're kind of overdrawn at the energy bank, it can show up in a lot of different ways, in our families, in our homes, in our classrooms. And that feeling of stress can get us into a cycle where, when we're feeling like that and then a new challenge comes up and our energy buckets are pretty empty, then it's even harder for us to deal effectively with those things. And so that can be a real challenge. So when we think about all of that, and then we turn to the question of what is resilience, the definition I've put together for it is maintaining high levels of effectiveness and well-being while dealing with high levels of challenge and disruption. And so a lot of people use the language bouncing back around resilience. I think of resilience as way more than that. I think that there are several outcomes that show up as forms of resilience. Sometimes resilience is about keeping things from getting worse, from minimizing harm, protecting ourselves, staying alive, protecting that niece with the compromised immune system, not dying from whatever it is, or if we're in a dangerous situation, just keeping things from being worse. Sometimes resilience is about staying on track, getting back on track, continuing to move forward toward our goals and objectives. And then sometimes resilience is about using these challenges as a source for growth. And I see that in some of the organizations that I work with, that they're able to figure out, amidst all of this, some ways that they can even make things better than they were, or use it as a jumping off point or a catalyst for some real creativity. We probably all have examples of people that have used challenges in life as a source for growth. You know, people who have been in abusive relationships who have then turned around and become resources for other people in that situation, or people who have gone through health issues and turned around. I have in fact, the big painting behind me here was painted by a woman I know who has lupus, has had lupus for a lot of years, and is a real bright spirit for a spokesperson for people with chronic illness. And so she's, among other things, used that as a source for growth. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that resilience shows up. And I think we need to honor those, because sometimes when we just talk about bouncing back or getting back to normal or growing, we don't honor the fact that sometimes just hanging in there is all you can do, and that's resilient too. And so I just want to take a moment and honor all the different ways that our resilience shows up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but there's a lot of research that suggests that resilience is helpful in getting results, in helping people gain better outcomes. So we've done some research around adjustment to college life, first-year students or international students. Some of the different elements I'm going to talk about in terms of resilience are predictive of how they do. I had a gal who did a dissertation using some of our stuff where she studied well-being in the parents of autistic kids and found relationships between their well-being and their resilience. Change readiness, some business-related outcomes, all of that. There's a connection between resilience, as I'm going to talk about it to you, and many different kinds of outcomes that are related to well-being and the kind of flourishing that we talk about. All right, so as I've been studying how resilience works, people use the word in a lot of different ways. They use it to talk about the outcomes. They use it to talk about individual differences that seem to differentiate it. They talk about the process. One of the research articles that I read recently that I really liked talks about resilience as a process that's related to a network of different things that show up. So when we're not, so oftentimes when we feel one kind of a symptom, like, you know, I feel really stupid because I didn't get the result that I wanted. Then that leads to another symptom like anxiety or worry or fear. And then sometimes that'll lead to physical symptoms like a knot in the stomach. And then we're all tensed up, and then our interactions aren't as good. And then we get worse results, and then we feel more hopeless. And then that, you know, and so we get into this spiral of symptoms that can move very quickly and can get us into a place of being really stuck. And if it's bad enough, these things can become self-sustaining. So we just get into a spin cycle that we get stuck in. And so what I believe is that how resilience works is resilience is a set of tools that enables us to keep that from happening, that enables us to shut down the thoughts before they get too far, or to notice the emotional reaction and do something to deal with it and to self-regulate before we move into the next place, or to just recognize the physical symptoms that we're feeling and try to understand what's going on and change the situation. So anything that we do that helps us affect that system in a positive way so that we get a spiral that's more about feeling calm and confident and effective, and we get a positive spiral going. To me, that's what resilience is about. And so there's a whole toolkit and a whole set of things that we can do and muscles we can build that help us intervene in that system to keep the symptoms from all reverberating and spiraling with each other and getting us into a place where we're less effective, and move us more into that zone where we're getting a positive spiral going. So I've come to think about resilience that way, and I've started to really try to understand what are the different entry points into that system. You know, what are the different ways we can get into that system and get it working well? Because if we don't get it working well one time, then it just leads to a worse state the next time, the next challenge we hit. Our energy buckets are empty and we get a worse result. And so we can get into a really dangerous downward spiral where resilience in one setting, you know, not being able to display sufficient resilience in one setting leads the next situation to be worse and the next situation to be worse. And so, you know, dragging us down. And so the idea is to reverse the spiral, you know, to have the tools to stop that negative spiral and move it in a more positive direction. So when I think about how resilience shows up, when we display resilience, it takes more to disrupt us. So it takes more to get that spiral going. We spend less energy because we can find ways to sort of slow the spin. We're able to get into more productive behavior and recover more quickly. And I have moved completely away from anything that labels a person as resilient or not. I believe we all have resilience within us, and I believe that we all move into and out of states of resilience. I would imagine that each of you can think of days when you felt really resilient, challenges that you've met in a really resilient way, and you can also probably think of the opposite. You know, days and times when you absolutely have gone into that spiral and spin, and not, the things haven't turned out as well as they might have. So I'm going to talk about 4 building blocks of resilience. The book that Barbara mentioned that I wrote called Prosilience talks about these in more detail. And I also, at the end of this, I've got a PDF document that's got a lot of links. And one of the links it has is to a video that I did that talks about these in more detail. I'm not going to dig down in super depth in these, but if you want, we're gonna cherry pick a few things to focus on here in the time that we have. And then we're going to talk about your resilience profiles as one part of that. So I think of 4 building blocks of resilience. So the first one is really most important when we first meet a challenge. So the first building block of resilience is calming. We're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. The next building block of resilience is choosing how we're going to approach the challenges that we're facing. Then, as challenges move on, there's often a lot of problem solving we need to do, a lot of things we need to figure out. And then, when challenges last a long time, that whole business of managing our energy and making sure that we have a strong supply of energy to draw on as we encounter challenges becomes really important. So I think all of these are ingredients of resilience, and they're all things that we can do and strengthen and build. And so as we talk about these, I invite you to think about how you're already doing these things, what you already know about these things, and where there are some areas that you might see potential for development. So let's start with calming, and we're going to come back to this in more detail because this whole business of self-regulation. So I'm going to speak to you on 2 levels. I'm going to speak to you as teachers and who have students that you're thinking about, but I also want to speak to you as human beings, parents, adults, you know, people in relationships, because putting the mask on your own face first is the thing that you can do that is going to be most effective to help your students. Tonight I'm doing a parent talk, a community parent talk that Barbara invited me to do, which any of you are welcome to attend as well. We'll make sure you have the link if any of you want to do it. But I'm going to be talking about some of the underlying skills here, and calming is one of them. This whole, like, how do you teach kids to self-regulate? Because this business of recognizing when you're disrupted and being able to pull yourselves back to a good place is one of the most important things you can do. And I often teach people just a simple breathing technique about breathing in to a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, breathing out to a count of 4, and holding for a count of 4. So I'm going to invite you just to try that, just in this moment here. I call it 4x4 breathing. So breathe into a 4, hold, breathe out, and hold. And if you repeat that a few times, it starts to tell your brain and your body that things are okay. You know, it really starts to shift your physiology. The third building block, so the first one is calming. I'm sorry, this is the second one, choosing strategies. So if this looks a little bit like the Serenity Prayer, it's because it's a little like the Serenity Prayer. Some challenges we've got to just accept. We've got to adjust to a new circumstance. Right?
Let's get you breathing properly with a little help from our friend Kiko.
All right. Somebody's got a good breathing resource. So one of the strategies, sometimes things are outside of our control. So we just have to adjust ourselves and figure out how to adapt to that new circumstance. Sometimes we can alter the situation. We can change or influence the situation, whether it's designing a new way to do things better, whether it's influencing somebody to make a decision that we like, whether it's changing the tire on our car, whatever it might be, we can alter the situation. And then the third strategy, which is actually a particularly powerful one, is reframing, which is finding a different way to look at the situation that makes it feel more hopeful. And this is actually another thing we're going to be talking about in the parent talk tonight, is about how do you teach kids to take different perspectives, to recognize that there's more than one way to look at a situation, so that you can use that as a basis for finding a different way to interpret this. I know, some people have talked about staying at home as lockdown, and other people are talking about it as flattening the curve. Those two ways of looking at it bring very different emotions up about how we're doing things. So as we move into a challenge, we can overuse any of these strategies. And so using the right ones at the right time are really important. You probably know people that always are trying to change things that are not within their control, and they're banging their head against the wall, and they're using up all their energy trying to make things the way they want them. And they never get around to figuring out how they can just adjust themselves to the circumstance. But then we probably can think of times when we've accepted too much, when we've just said, oh, I'll just adapt to this, and I'm not going to stand up and speak out about it, and I'm just going to let it roll over me. And we probably know some people that are always reframing, oh, I can find a bright side to anything. So figuring out what battles we want to fight, what things we want to take on, where we want to put our energy is the second building block of resilience, because that's that part of wisdom about knowing where to place our energy and knowing which struggles to take on. The third building block is solving problems. And we're going to come back to this in a lot more detail with the personal resilience profile, because there's a set of muscles that we use to move through solving problems and dealing with challenges with the most effective use of our energy. And so we each have a core set of these muscles that can be developed. And just the advanced organizer is positivity, confidence, priorities, creativity, connection, structure, experimenting. I'm going to go through each of those in the second part of our program. And we're going to talk about how each of these plays a role in helping us solve problems and use our energy more effectively as we deal with those challenges. And then, of course, the fourth building block is managing energy. And we know that we can protect and build and replenish our energy. And we're going to come back to that a little bit as well. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about what people can do themselves for resilience, but we have to understand that resilience takes place in context. So what an individual brings to a situation, the skills, the mental muscles they bring are really important, but we also have to understand that the history that people have plays a role. If people come to us with a history of trauma, with a history of abuse, with a history of, whatever it might be, that's going to shape responses to the present. That's true for us as well. If we've had certain kinds of experiences, they're going to shape how we interpret new experiences. Another contextual element that's really important is resources. People who have more resources to draw on are often better able to get resilient outcomes because they've got more resources to throw at it. So, I've seen some of the statistics on the percent of people in the world who couldn't deal with an unexpected bill of $400, where, there are other people who have many, many resources to draw on. I think that's an issue in the school system that in Atlanta here, but I think it's true for you all as well, that there are some communities that are well-resourced and some communities that are not so well-resourced in terms of access to technology, access to internet, access to the kind of money that you can use to hire tutors or, get special help. And so those resources really make a difference in the outcomes of resilience. The environment that people are in, so many different ways, is going to shape their ability to respond with resilience, whether it feels like a safe environment, whether it's a noisy environment, whatever it might be. The level of social connection that people have, we're going to come back to that. And then the sense of psychological safety. So when people feel psychologically safe, they are much less likely to move into those spirals, because it's that sense of danger and potential harm that makes it easier for people to bring up those responses that aren't as helpful. So I think it's just really important to understand that as teachers, we create environments for people that can enable their resilience in addition to teaching them skills and mindsets that can be helpful. And we can be mindful of our own circumstances and contexts and figure out, what we can draw on to help us with resilience. We're going to dig into the building blocks of resilience in a little bit more detail. And I want to start with self-regulation. Most of you have probably mastered this pretty well, but it's a super important skill for your students. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And of course, we can all get better at it as we go. So this is really related to building block 1 about calming. And it's really important early in encountering challenges. So you all are probably familiar with the way that it mostly shows up in classrooms. I'm guessing that most of you have done some sort of curriculum or got some sort of familiarity around work in social and emotional learning. And that's one of the places where we have an opportunity to teach kids about self-regulation and to understand how to manage themselves. I was looking around for resources to share with you all, and I found a really interesting one that's from the association that does work in social and emotional learning, and they put together a guide to reopening with SEL. So it's really about the COVID-19 thing, and it's a guide to doing that. I've got the link to it in the document that I'm going to give you all, and so you're welcome to go find that in addition to tapping into the link here. So I just thought it was really interesting. So I'm going to get really technical here. How many of you have ever heard of polyvagal theory? No? Okay. How many of you have heard of the autonomic nervous system? Probably most of us have. Okay. How many of you have heard the words fight or flight? Okay, so most of us know this idea that our body can kick into fight or flight mode when we feel scared. This is actually a theory that I found. So my background is kind of weird. So I have a psychology background, I have a massage therapy background, and I've gotten interested in all kinds of stuff because of that. So this is something that is mostly used by therapists or people in sort of clinical kinds of settings because it's a more academic way of looking at things. But it's basically a theory that talks about the neuroscience of safety and what makes us feel safe and what happens when we don't. And it's called polyvagal theory because we have a nerve that's called the vagus nerve. And vagus in Latin means the wanderer. And it's called the wandering nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. So if you look at this diagram over here, it comes out of the brain stem here and it goes through and it innervates our lungs, our heart, our colon, and all of that. And this is the way our whole system talks to itself. So all of these communications are going not just from your brain down to those things, but from those things up to the brain. And so there's this theory about how we are regulated using this system, and that there's three principles that I want to talk about. The primary founder of this is a guy by the name of Dr. Stephen Porges. And so there's a book that he has that's pretty technical and researchy. Then there are other books that I've found out there that are more accessible. But there hasn't been a lot written about this for just sort of, education or organizations or whatever. And so that's one of the things I'm working on these days, is trying to translate this stuff into plain language. So there are three principles around this theory. One is that we have 3 levels of response when, regarding safety, and it's going to influence how we think and act. The second is something called neuroception, which is basic, well, I'll get to it. And then the third is co-regulation. So I have a slide on each of these. So this idea of 3 levels of response is that when we are at the highest level of response and we're feeling safe and connected, that's where we need to be open to learning and growth. Because when we're in this zone, we spontaneously engage. Level 2 is what a lot of people think of as fight or flight. When we feel threatened, we go into a mode of activation. And that's the part where our muscles are poised for action, to run away, to fight, but we can feel our energy come up. And when we're in that zone, one of the things I found said, basically life happens in the next 15 seconds. We're not thinking about consequences. We're not thinking about logic. We're thinking about, what do I need to do in this moment right now? And then the level 1, sort of the lowest level, is when we feel threats to life, then we move into a very immobilized, withdrawn kind of state. We just pull back from everything. So if you've ever seen an animal being attacked by another one and it'll just crumple onto the ground, that's that response. And so the idea is that the only place that we can actually learn is when we're in that level 3 state. But that doesn't mean that we have to be there all the time. It just means that we need to know how to move ourselves back there appropriately. So the first thing this theory says is that it's not just fight or flight and, and sort of regular engagement, but there's actually a third level that we can go to that's even deeper than that. The second thing is that the systems that we rely on to move us from one level to another happen without our awareness. So we don't even know why we're feeling the way we're feeling. So we gather information from inside our body, what our gut is telling us, what our heart is telling us, what our skin is telling us. We gather information from the outside environment about whether it's safe or not, the cues that we see. We gather information about people and relationships, and all of that is happening without us knowing it. About 80% of the information from our gut and brain connection goes upward, not downward. So there's a lot of information being fed into the system that never even gets to consciousness. Now, we sometimes tell ourselves stories about why things are happening the way they are. That's what our brains do, is they tell the stories. But basically, all of this stuff is happening, and it's sending signals of safety or danger that are going to move us back and forth between these levels. What we also know is that we're not always accurate about perceiving the level of risk. And if we have experienced unpredictable or unsafe environments in the past, it creates a bias toward protection, toward moving us to those other levels, level 2 and level 1, perhaps when there's not a real objective level of danger, but we're sensing it, and that's what's happening. And I've learned a couple of interesting things about this whole neuroception. I ran into some surprises. So one of them is that when we are looking at other people, the vagus nerve connects up with the muscles around the eye. It connects up with the muscles of the upper face. And so we interpret a lot when we look at other people from what we're seeing there without them saying a word. So if you've ever seen how some people on the autism spectrum have sometimes smoother brows, they have less facial expression. That's part of why people sometimes interpret them differently than they think they're coming across. And when we see people where that part of the face is frozen, like think Botox, right? You can't read the expressions. And so we interpret that. We make interpretations of that without awareness of what we're seeing from people. And what that means is that we develop a sense of trust or mistrust based on cues that are very, very subtle and very hard to read. The next thing I found that was really interesting is that our system, because of all of the history of our species, is tuned to pay attention to predators. So, so when we listen, especially if we're in a state of potential danger, we're going to be really, really tuned into some things. So when we are in that level 2 or level 1 state, it actually affects our middle ear. The lower sounds are the sounds that predators make, the growls and all of that. And so when we are feeling danger, we're more tuned to that, and we actually hear less of the middle range of the sound spectrum. And what that means is that when we are feeling in that level 2 or level 1 state, we can't hear the human voices clearly. And so literally when people are feeling like that, they're sitting there and they're hearing wah, 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 wah. They're just not hearing what you're saying. They tune into maybe the first parts of things and not the second parts of things. And lower sound frequencies like elevator noises, rumbles, all that kind of stuff are things that our body picks up on as cues of danger without us even knowing it. So the sound environment that people are in is one of the things that can influence how safe they feel. So I thought all of those were interesting. There's more that I'm learning about that, but I just, it's fascinating how much information we're picking up from the world around us without being aware of it. And so what that means is that we, as people who are creating that environment, need to be super attuned to the cues that we're sending around safety or danger, or how we're creating the world around people in a way where that their neuroceptions are not going to feel unsafe. The third piece is co-regulation. So we talk about self-regulation, but we learn self-regulation through co-regulation. We are biologically wired to connect with other people. And so as little human beings, one of the things that teaches us to co-regulate is connecting with a reliable, regulating other. So that creates a shared sense of safety, and that teaches us how to move ourselves in and out of those states of comfort and discomfort. Now, this doesn't mean that we're always attuned to the other person. So we only actually have to be attuned about a third of the time to a regulating other. The process of mismatch, I look away from you, you cry, I look back at you, we smile, all of that back and forth, that attunement, that mismatch, that repair, that cycle process is part of what creates a regulated and flexible system. And so when people have not grown up with these experiences of feeling regulated when they're young, it's very easy for them to move into dysregulation, and their nervous system is more likely to downshift into those level 2 and level 1 things. So ongoing sense of disconnection, ongoing lack of this co-regulation leads to mental and medical health risks. Now, what I find interesting is I think about the whole education thing. And one of the reasons why I really, really, really like having the videos up and making sure that we all get to say hi to each other is the faces are so, I miss the faces. My family's been getting together on Zoom calls, and just seeing the faces. Co-regulation, even from a distance, even if I can't feel the heartbeat of the person there, that connection from a distance and seeing the faces, just seeing those orbicularis oculi muscles, going, which is all part of how we're reading another person, is super important. So there's a ton of implications of this as you all think about what you do from a distance and how you build that connection with the humans who are part of your world. So the social engagement system, the thing that we use to connect with other people, tunes into eye muscles and the wrinkles around the eyes. It tunes into what they call prosody in voice. So that's the rhythm, the tone, the frequency. So when someone has a real flat mechanical voice, it doesn't sound as warm and welcoming as it does when someone's using the full range of their voice and have a rhythmic voice. Facial expressions, head and body posture. So all of this social engagement stuff is super important for helping people regulate. It's not the same as social support. Social support can be very transactional. I'm giving you help, I'm giving you this, but if I'm not feeling safe with you, social support doesn't feel safe. You've probably been helped by people who it didn't feel good to be helped by. So we've talked about adversity. And we know that that's the kind of thing that can cause us to downshift to those other levels. When people encounter a lot of adversity in their lives, it can build up a backlog of dysregulation. And so there's some research, we're not going to go into detail. I know some of the past programs that Barbara has sponsored have gone deeply into this work on adverse childhood experiences. And there's some really important research there. But if we look at these kinds of things, so the people who did the research on this have defined adverse childhood experiences as examples of abuse, things in the household that weren't healthy, neglect of various sorts. And this is one piece of data around the prevalence of this, although this is a fairly older, mostly white, educated population. So the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences are probably even greater in other populations. There's a lot of stuff being done on this, but they found a ton of linkages between the frequency of adverse childhood experiences and just so many different things: maternal health, chronic disease, risky behaviors, et cetera. And so being aware that the people who are coming into our virtual classrooms may be bringing with them some of this heavy load that is leading them to be more likely to move into those zones where they can't learn as well, is super important. And it means that creating safety is really our first goal. So to support the resilience of the people in our world, making sure that we're doing everything we can to help them feel safe, especially if there's someone that's coming with a background of adversity. So I pulled together some stuff on sort of what that means from a teaching standpoint, some guidelines around trauma-informed teaching. And this may be one that you'll want to come back to because there's a lot of information on this slide, but there are some suggested practices about being sensitive to the fact that some people may be bringing this load with them. Trauma is a big word, but it really just means wound. People bring wounds with them. And when people are wounded and they come into our world, some of the things that we can do to help them regulate more effectively are establishing routines, chunking information and not trying to dump it all on them at once, affirming them, asking open-ended questions, being curious rather than trying to give them all the answers. It's, rituals, thinking differently about the questions that we ask, moving from what's wrong with you to what's driving your behavior or what's happened to you. How did you come to be feeling like this? Moving from consequences to safety, just thinking about that. I've put some sources here, and in the resources that I've pulled together, there's several things around trauma-informed teaching, around ACEs, around self-regulation, and all of that, if you want to dig a little bit deeper into this topic. So here are some key points, just to summarize this piece around the first building block, some key points around self-regulation. Past trauma affects our physiological state, which affects how we're perceiving things in the present. Whenever people are in level 1 or 2, they're doing the best they know how. Most of the response, well, I would say really probably without exception, people are doing the best they know how to reduce threat and try to regulate. And so, they're not acting out because they're just bad people. They just don't know or aren't able to access the responses that are going to get them what they want. Another thing that's interesting is that the window of tolerance, or the amount of available energy, or however you want to think about it, the amount of disruption that people can tolerate when they're in dysregulation, when they've moved out of a sense of regulation, their window of tolerance is smaller. And there are various metaphors that people have used. People on the autism spectrum often use a spoons metaphor. I've seen an interesting video about poker chips as a metaphor for self-esteem. We talk about emotional bank accounts, but what it all comes down to is when you're drained of energy because you have some ongoing drains or some ongoing things that are sucking that energy out of you, you're not going to be able to take on as much. The challenges that you're going to be able to take on are smaller. And we all know that ourselves. We've all had days when we're dysregulated and our windows of tolerance were small, and the littlest thing is going to tip us over the edge. So when people are in that protective zone, level 2, level 1, consequences don't register. Reasoning and logic is ineffective. They're about surviving the next 15 seconds. So our primary goal is to create safety and co-regulation. And what that means is that we ourselves need to be regulated, because a regulating human being is one of the things that is a critical ingredient in helping others be regulated. We're now going to go to your personal resilience profile. Here's what I'm going to invite you to do if you did not receive yours and don't have it available for this conversation. I will absolutely send it to you after this. So I would invite you to just do a little self-rating as you go along, as we talk about the different muscles and characteristics, and see what you think about where you might be. And then you can compare that to your real results when we get there. And if you did not have a chance to complete it at all in advance of this, then we certainly will make sure that you get a chance to do that. I think there may have been 1 or 2 of you that hadn't done that. So anyway, so this is the third building block of resilience. So when we think about, if building block 1 is that calming self-regulation, building block number 2 is figuring out which things do we adapt ourselves to, which things do we change. Now we're getting in there and we're trying to do that. We're trying to adjust, we're trying to change, we're trying to solve problems. And there's a set of muscles that we use that I believe everybody has. Some of us, some of our muscles are stronger than others. Some of mine are stronger than others. Some of yours are. And just like our physical muscles, if we have a weaker muscle, it feels harder to use. It takes more energy to use that muscle. These muscles can be developed through regular practice and through challenge and recovery. So we build these muscles by encountering challenges and overcoming them. And that's, of course, another lesson for parents and for teachers, is that we don't ever want to try to remove all the challenges from our students' paths. But what we want to do is to make sure that they're within that zone that they can get on the other side of and build muscles from. So anyway, so here's an overview of the resilience characteristics and how they help. We're going to go through them, each of them in detail. And as I go through them, if you have your profile available, you can sort of line up what I'm saying with what you see on your profile. We're going to do a little exercise in a bit where I'll have you break out and share any insights from your profile with someone else. Your data is confidential. No one's going to see it but you. I will show you a group chart that shows a summary of the highs and lows and averages for the group, the TFI group that completed this, because I thought you all might find that interesting. But yours is yours. And so I just invite you to see what it tells you about your own responses to challenge. So this is an overview. We're going to hit each of these, and I'll come back with a summary of this. So as you interpret your results, it's about your approach to challenges and situations that disrupt your expectations. This is not a general personality inventory. It's really about where does your attention go? Where does your energy go when you meet challenges? And you probably have favorite muscles, just like some people have stronger biceps and some people have stronger quads. You probably have some stronger muscles as well. Confidentiality I mentioned. The scores represent percentiles. In a group like this, I guarantee you I don't have to explain what a percentile is. So it really has to do with how your response is compared to a large database of other people that have completed this tool. It reflects your experiences and use of the muscles over time. We found through research that your relative strengths are fairly stable, but your mood and energy when you complete the thing can make the whole thing kind of go up and down. Like the highs will still be the highs and the lows will be the lows. But if you're feeling super drained when you complete the questionnaire, your overall level might be a little bit lower. And one of the things that means is that if you're feeling really depleted of energy, you probably don't have a lot to fuel your muscles with. And you may find that your muscles are not as strong as they would be when you're in a state of higher energy. So your higher scores are the muscles you tend to lead with when you deal with challenges. And as we all know, we can overuse our strengths. Lower scores are muscles that you can apply when needed. Like for instance, we'll get to this structure muscle. It's not my highest one. I can structure the heck out of things, but it feels like work. So I'll share some stories. So a balanced ability to draw on all the muscles is helpful, and teams can leverage their diverse strengths. So each of us may bring strengths, and if we work together to leverage those, we can be more resilient together often than we can individually. So this is a sample profile. Higher scores indicate a greater comfort with challenge or a greater openness to challenge at this point in the world. Lower scores suggest that you're probably looking for a little bit more stability right now, and that probably taking on more challenge is not high on your list. Then the higher scores are the ones you tend to lead with, and then you go down to the next ones. This person in the example tends to lead with the muscle around connection and the muscle around experimenting, which we'll talk about. And the muscle that's weakest for them is creativity, followed by positivity. So we can see that there's a unique style that we each bring to the challenges that we face, and that this can tell us something about. So let's start with positivity. This is kind of one of the foundational muscles. This one and the next one are what I think of as the core muscles of resilience. This is the muscle that we use to identify opportunities and hope in challenging situations. So when we're using this muscle, this is the muscle that helps us engage our energy, keep going when we hit setbacks, inspire and energize people around us, look for opportunities. When we're not using this muscle, and we all have days when we're not using this muscle, we're in a state where we get discouraged really easily. Our energy gets drained in worrying and avoiding. We focus on problems, difficulties. et cetera. And so we move back and forth between these, but most of us have some sort of a set point, you know, sort of a place where we start. Do you tend to be more glass half full or glass half empty? You know, do you tend to be more of an optimist or a pessimist? My husband and I are at opposite ends on this. I'm way more toward the positivity end. He's a self-described defensive pessimist. It's his job to figure out all the things that can go wrong and protect against them. And that can be a very useful thing to have sometimes. So, you know, so leveraging that diversity is super important, but my energy is more geared toward the entrepreneurship. You know, I tend to be the one that's approaching challenges while he's the one that reluctantly is dealing with them and figuring out how to move forward with them. And he knows I talk about this, so it's okay. The second muscle is around confidence. And this is about believing you can use your capabilities to successfully deal with challenges. So when this muscle is engaged, we know our strengths and weaknesses. We are able to take a growth mindset. If you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work on mindset about, you know, the setback is just an opportunity for learning and growth. There's some assertiveness and influence to step in. When we're not using this, those are the times when we may feel more like people are doing things to us, or we're trying to avoid other people judging us negatively. We may be hanging back and waiting for other people to get things done, you know, and we just may not be the person who's starting the action. So one or the other of these first two muscles typically is engaged to help us move toward challenges. So we can either move toward a challenge because of positivity, because we see opportunities, or we move toward it because we believe in our own capabilities, even if it's about fighting dragons or fighting fires. If both of these are low, then what that typically means is that we're in the mode of trying to avoid challenges right now. That our energy is low enough that we're not actively seeking to encounter more challenges, and we may see the world more in terms of dangers. The third muscle is around priorities. So this is about identifying and paying attention to the most important things. This is the muscle of clear values, of saying yes to some things and no to others. This is the muscle that helps us make choices about where we invest our energy. Every single one of these muscles, if we're not engaging it, can be an energy drain. So when positivity is not there or confidence isn't there, our energy can get drained off in worry and rumination and avoiding, as opposed to moving into. Priorities, when we're engaging this muscle, this is the muscle that helps us say no without guilt. This is not just saying no, but being clear about our no's and our yeses. This is the thing that helps us stay on track, to get back on track, to find our North Star. When we're not engaging this muscle, it's often because we have too many things that are drawing on our energy and we're having a hard time reconciling them or choosing them or prioritizing them. We may not be in control of whether we can prioritize all of them. We may have, you know, an aging parent and a kid on the way and a sick spouse and, you know, all kinds of things. And it may be very, very difficult to do that. So this is a muscle that allows us to use our energy most effectively by choosing where we're going to put our time and effort. So the fourth muscle that we're going to talk about in problem solving is creativity. This is the muscle around generating possibilities and options. And this is a muscle of tolerance for ambiguity, of being able to live with not having an answer right away, of thinking of plan A, plan B, plan C, of not focusing on finding the right answer or believing that there's one right way to do things. So when we're not using this muscle much, we're sticking more with familiar ways of thinking. We're looking for the best answer. We may get into the I'm right, you're wrong. Our country has a severe deficit of this muscle right now. We're in a very polarized, as you all know, political environment where, you know, where we're preferring, people often are preferring opinions similar to their own. This is a muscle that's very important for innovation. It's a muscle that's important for thinking out of the box and for dealing with unfamiliar situations. Not surprisingly, there's a connection muscle. This is the muscle that we use to reach out for help, to build community, to become part of, to build relationships. Most of us in this profession are very comfortable giving support. Some of us are not as comfortable in asking for it. And some of us may not proactively invest the time to build those loose networks of connections that enable us to draw on them. There's some research that talks about strong ties and weak ties. So strong ties are those small core of people that we rely on. And, you know, those are important. But the data suggests that it's those weaker ties. It's the LinkedIn connections and the Facebook connections and the third cousin of the third cousin that you know, that is predictive of whether we're able to use our networks to find new jobs, to open up new opportunities, to find the answers to random questions, whatever it might be. So when we're using this muscle, we are comfortable asking for help. We're comfortable reaching out for emotional support. We tend to invest more of our energy in building community and building connection. When we're not using this muscle, this is a muscle I struggle with sometimes. I'm an oldest child with a PhD, so I'm supposed to know all the answers, right? And so it's hard for me sometimes to feel not vulnerable when I ask for help or assistance. But I also now run a business, and I realize that if I can't ask for help and support, then I'm actually going to have to do everything myself, and it works much better when I have a team. So this is you know, if you are feeling like it's only going to get done right if you do it, if you're waiting for other people to reach out. Now, some of us have, so here's one of Linda's mini soapboxes. I get really tired of the whole introversion extroversion thing. I think most of us are ambiverts. That is, we move into and out of introversion and extroversion. And a lot of people use a label of introversion as an excuse to not initiate connection with people. You know, they feel like it's somebody else's job to do that. I have a very introverted side. And so I can totally relate to the desire to like just go crawl in a hole with a glass of wine and, you know, just chill. But what I would say is that introvert, extrovert, ambivert, whatever you are, spending some time initiating contact, building those connections so that when the time comes, reaching out for help is an easy act. And there's this natural give and take in the community that you're in. That's super important. All right, so we've covered 5 muscles. We've covered positivity, confidence, priorities, creativity, connection. There's 2 of them left. Structure is sometimes counterintuitive when we think about dealing with challenges and changes, but this muscle is really important because it helps us use our energy efficiently. This is the lesson plan muscle. This is the schedule muscle. This is the getting out ahead of things and figuring out how long things are going to take. This is the attention to detail muscle. This is my weakest muscle, but I've learned how important it is. And more importantly, I've learned to value the people around me who bring this energy, because I recognize the value that it brings to me and to all of us. So many of us who think pretty quickly can hold structures in our head, but this muscle also enables us to put it out there, to externalize structures. And that's super important in teaching. It's super important in coordinating with people because it's what helps us build habits, what helps us coordinate, what helps us communicate the system and the plan to people. When we're not using this muscle, we resist routine, maybe we get impatient with the details, we may try to keep everything in our head. And so for me, like I said, I can do this, but it feels like work. But I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress. Then the last muscle is experimenting. The experimenting muscle is the risk-taking muscle. It's the muscle that allows us to get out of our comfort zone, try the thing in the restaurant we've never tried before, do an experiment and see how it turns out, take that road just to see where it goes. And so it's a curiosity muscle in a big way. So this is about stretching out of our comfort zone. I once talked to somebody who had a 99th percentile score on this, and they were part of a team, and the team was like, what's that like? You know, what's it like to be 99th percentile on experimenting? They had had 10 different jobs and lived in a bunch of different countries, and like they were always on the hunt for new experiences. And so when that's out of balance with other things, it can be a problem. But when it's in the mix with clear priorities and good support and so on, this is the muscle that helps us learn quickly. It helps us try things, learn, take that learning into account, and keep moving. But it involves sometimes looking like a fool. It involves sometimes failing. It involves sometimes getting things wrong. So this muscle is the thing that helps us put ideas into action quickly. So when we are in a zone where everything's just fine the way it is, you know, we're sticking with the tried and true stuff, and we're waiting until all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed until we move, that's when we're not using this muscle as much. Or if we are in a situation where we're risk averse, where we're not looking for risk right now. And so, you know, sometimes when we've just had a big setback, we don't want to take any more risk. So all of these things are in motion. And so this is a muscle that is fun to use, and it supports the others, and it works in conjunction with the other ones. Any one of the muscles can be overused. Too much positivity may lead us to be blind to risks and realities. Overusing priorities may mean that we have tunnel vision and we only ever see a few things. Too much connection, we may over rely on other people. So it's really there's no one best way to be. It's really a question of, what do you know about yourself, and how can you use these strengths to work your way through the challenges that you have, and how can you build any muscles that you think might be helpful to you to use your energy more effectively and meet these challenges more effectively. So as you review your profile, take just a minute, and if you've got your profile on your computer, pull it up. If you printed it out, pull it up. I want you to look at a couple of things. First of all, I want you to look at the overall level and just see if right now you're looking for more challenges, you're wishing for more stability, or maybe a little of both. So, you know, overall high scores, overall low scores, or a mixed bag. Then I want you to think about what you lead with during uncertainty. So your highest scores are probably the first place you go when you hit uncertainty. Is it reaching out to other people? Is it listening to your own judgment? Is it getting out there and trying an experiment? Is it putting a structure in place? What, you know, where do you go first? Then what are some of the things that you don't draw on as easily? What feels like more work for you as you move into uncertainty? And then how does that fit with where you want to be? Are there risks or opportunities that presents for you? Are there places where you might like to focus your development? So take a look at that. If you were one of the people who doesn't have a profile, just go with your own self-assessment. Just think about, what do you know about what you lead with during uncertainty? What do you know about your comfort with challenge versus comfort with stability? And do you have some thoughts about, is there a muscle you'd like to work on building? Here's the composite chart for this group. So basically we have from 1 to 99 on most of the characteristics. There's, you know, we are a microcosm of the population at large. We have people who have all different kinds of complementary strengths. And what's really cool about that is if you look at the top of this, we have scores from 94 to 99. We are all more resilient together than we are individually. We have tremendous strengths in this group. And if we can figure out how to leverage one another's resilient strengths, we can all collectively come up with more effective ways to deal with challenges. Now, as a group, if we look at the averages, we see that the two things that jump out as sort of collective strengths are confidence and structure. Which I think really fits with my image of what teachers need to have to move into the classroom. But we also have, you know, we're sort of at a little bit below the median of the population on the other characteristics as well. So this is a group that's pretty typical. You know, we're about as resilient as other groups or communities that we might look at. And so, you know, we each bring our individual tendencies to that. Now, I'm going to invite you to do another breakout discussion because I'd like you to have a chance to just process this a little bit. I'm going to give you 10 minutes if I can figure out how to set the time, which I didn't do on the last one. And I'd like you to discuss 3 questions. One is, what insights and observations in general came up for you? So it's just sort of general, what did I learn from this? Any ahas? And then I'd like you to think about a strength, What is one of your superpowers that were identified here? And what's one area you'd like to think about developing? So I'll broadcast the assignment too once you get into your breakout rooms. So give me just a minute to set these up. I won't ask you to do a lot of sharing of your discussion unless you want to. I'm gonna, of course, invite it, but mostly I just want you to have a chance to talk to each other and talk to a couple of other people about any insights that came up for you. Where we're going to go next is actually about what you do with all this. So how do you go about building something? And the first place I want to start is with this idea of micro challenges. So a micro challenge is a challenge that is well within the scope of our energy to manage. So it's something that we recognize as a challenge, but that's not whomping our energy. This is a great place to build intentionality. So as we meet a small challenge, notice what muscles we're using. Sort of consciously think through, how am I using my positivity, my confidence, or after you've taken on a small challenge. These micro challenges are great places to practice. And so I would say, organize something that's 5 minutes worth of organizing. There's a life coach named Martha Beck who has a book called The 4-Day Win or something, and she talks about ridiculously easy daily goals. It's like you take a goal and you cut it in half and you cut it in half again, and then you just do it every day. The other thing that's cool about micro challenges is that most big challenges are made up of micro challenges. The old saying about how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So, the challenge of dealing with the loss of a loved one. I lost my dad about 18 months ago, and it shows up in the form of small challenges, like wishing I could share a story with him, or, remembering a certain thing, or having Christmas and not having him there. And so every big challenge, or most big challenges, are made up of a lot of little ones. And so being able to look at one small challenge at a time. Okay, so I have a child with special needs. Well, today it's the meltdown about getting into the car to go someplace. Tomorrow it's about finding the right teacher for them to work with in the school that they're going to. So think about the big challenges that you face as a bunch of little challenges, and figure out, like, how do I use these as my resilience gym? How do I do the biceps curl for this muscle, as opposed to trying to take on a whole big course of, learning how to plan? You don't need to do it all at once. This is, we're all works in progress, and we rewire our brains a little bit at a time. I'll give you an example. So I talked about my husband. One of the things that we do now is, and he kind of knows it's resilience practice, but he forgives me for that. We do a gratitude practice every night when we sit down to dinner. We each share one thing that we're grateful for. And so it's a way of training the brain to pay attention to the good. And so those little practices are really important. And it's super important to think about how we create them as habits, how we build them into our life as habits of practicing these things. So some of the things I've learned from reading about habits is that we do better when we stack our habits. So like if we find something we already do every day, like make your cup of coffee in the morning, or whatever it is, use that as a trigger to do the next thing. To take 3 minutes to think about what are the most important things for my day if you're working on priorities, or to think about who can I reach out to today. If it used to be the commute to work, but whatever it is, anytime you have something that's using your morning coffee to be a reminder to take your vitamins, or, anything that you want to do, if you've got an already established habit and can stack it, you can do that. And baby steps. Tracking is important too, and it's more about consistency rather than perfection. So whether it's a check mark on the calendar or whatever it is. And then the other thing I would say is that willpower is a muscle. And so when we're building habits, create the environment around you so that it supports them. I want to build a habit of practicing music more often. So it makes a difference whether I have the guitar sitting out on a stand where I can easily pick it up, or if I have to get it out of the case and go get it and all of that. If I want to eat less candy, having the candy jar not on the desk in front of me doesn't, means that my willpower doesn't get taxed with it. So arranging your environment, putting your workout clothes out the night before so that they're there, anything that you can do to put those habits in place. So Evelyn, one of the things that you might do is to figure out what is the one organizing system I'm going to use. One of the things that us organized deficit people have is the tendency to have too many systems that we try to keep up.
You're not kidding.
3 different calendars, or
And
whatever.
then I'm like a creative person, so I'm always inventing new systems. And then I got, it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of it's dialing back a little of that energy and putting it into maintaining some of the systems that you already have. I've been working with my mom on that as we've been, liberating some energy in her house and decluttering some things. It takes a certain amount of focus. So anyway, so I mentioned some research findings. I just want to call your attention to the bottom line here. So across the top here, you'll see all the different muscles. And these are some different outcomes. Principles with transformational leadership is related to several of the resilience characteristics. International students, adjustment to college is related to some of the resilience characteristics. So just think about the outcomes that you're wanting to achieve and how each of these muscles might be helpful to you in getting there. All right, we're gonna wrap up with sustaining your energy, building block number 4, because having a good supply of energy to power your muscles is really important for outlasting these long challenges. So the first thing I would say is that there are 3 parts to sustaining your energy. One is protecting. That's recognizing where the energy drains are, the people who drain your energy, the things that drain your energy, the habits that that not sleeping well is draining your energy. So it's finding those energy drains and plugging the leaks. The next thing is building. How do I build my mental energy? How do I build my emotional energy? And one way that we can help kids build their emotional energy is to have a vocabulary for emotions, for instance, being able to name and talk about what they're feeling. We can build mental energy by just engaging in different kinds of mental things, mental downtime, solving problems, whatever it might be. And then we need to know how to replenish our energy. So we need to know what feeds us spiritually, what feeds us emotionally, what feeds us physically, what feeds us mentally, and allowing that time and place for self-care and replenishment. So you probably don't need the reminder, but I'm going to remind you anyway, because you guys need to take care of your energy. We're getting ready to move into the big push, and it doesn't do you any good to put everybody else's energy in front of you. So if we start as an example of physical energy, you can probably think of one of these things that you could be doing more with: rest, breathing, hydration, nutrition, movement. These are the keys. Just think about, energy drains, about building and so on. You can find more ideas. You can come up with your own ideas around all of these things, but I would just say be attentive to your energy. Do an energy bucket exercise. Draw 4 buckets. How full am I in each of these energies? And think about, what do I need to do to make sure that these buckets stay full? And the other thing I would say about energy is look at micro boosts. So micro boosts are those little shots of energy that get that spiral going back in a positive direction. We so often look at the overall sweep of a day when there were a lot of challenges, and we don't notice those moments. So this is about savoring. This is about, noticing interesting things when you're walking, or noticing how the light is falling through the window on something. It's just taking time to attend to those little shots of energy. And if you have some extra energy, making a micro boost for somebody else. Smiling at them, saying a kind word to them, doing something nice for somebody, whatever it might be. All of those things help us move the cycle, move the spirals in a good direction. So just to recap, building blocks: when we meet challenges, we calm, we choose strategies, we solve problems, we engage our energy, and we get those outcomes of minimizing harm, staying on track, and growth. Summary. You probably don't need me to go back over that, but here it is. If you want to fast forward through the recording that we make of this and look at the summary, this is your cheat sheet. And finally, I used to close with the idea that we can say, oh, rush hour traffic, yay, it's an opportunity to practice our resilience. It's a micro challenge. Now, not so much rush hour traffic. So I'm going to invite you to, when you get into another online meeting, to say, instead of cursing, say, oh, resilience practice. And I'm going to also remind you that resilience is contagious. Just as the coronavirus is, we can think of the R naught of resilience. Your own effectiveness and well-being impacts the effectiveness and well-being of the people around you, impacts the effectiveness and well-being of your communities, your workplaces, impacts the well-being of the world. And so every little bit you do is going to help make the world a better place.